Hello everyone, and welcome back down here to the Gamer's Den. With me, your host, Jordan, your master of lore and storyteller extraordinaire. Sorry for the late uploads here. Got another video in the works that I'm editing, but hopefully I will keep us caught up by posting 2 videos a week. Let's go ahead and just dive right into it, shall we? We are continuing on with our Making Better campaign series, and we are going on further with the Making War campaigns. And specifically, I wanted to talk today about how to go up planning a larger battle setting, a larger war campaign, and how to kind of get that set up in such a way that you can incorporate the players pretty nice and easy into things. Now, there's, of course, a number of ways to do it, but today specifically, we are taking a look up at how to plan for war, drawing up battle plans, and then being ready for the inevitable point when the players decide to muck it all up. But of course, as with any other thing, any other campaign, no matter the setting, no matter the style, no matter the game, what matters most is having the details in place ahead of time. What details do we need to worry about? Well, glad you asked, glad you're wondering and thinking about that, because having that figured out ahead of time makes life a lot easier for you. So, the first things you need to figure out are, well, aside from the game that you're playing, are the scale of the battle. How big is this going to be? How much of a pitched effort will it be? Because if it's a light skirmish, well, and hey, easy enough to figure out, the player characters may even be able to take care of most of the fighting themselves, because even if it's just a skirmish between, say, 30 opponents and a player party of about 4 or 5 players, if they even manage to take out 10, 15, or even 20 of the enemy units, the commanders are going to wisely and rightly probably end up trying to leave. Or if they're foolish and foolhardy enough that they are just bound and determined to capture and kill these insolent bastards, well, that's a whole nother thing, and the players can easily use somebody that's stupid and foolish and pissed off to lure them into all sorts of tricks, traps, and ambushes to really tilt the odds even further in their favor. But if it's going to be a larger pitched siege or a multi-day war, well, a multi-day battle, then things are going to last a lot longer. But either way, there'll be opportunities for you to incorporate the players in so many different ways. Also, the kind of battle that you're fighting. I already touched on it a little bit, but we have skirmishes, sieges, we have protracted battlefields on open plains, we have defensive battles, we have offensive battles, and that just depends on which side the players are on. If they're on the defense or offense, things will change up a little bit for them, namely the goals and what exactly it is they're trying to do. And really, setting will also change things up a bit as well too, because if you're playing in Dark Heresy, the Warhammer 40k universe, it's going to be a fair bit different to what happens and what's going on in comparison to, your standard Dungeons and Dragons or Pathfinder high fantasy sort of setting. Obviously, you're not going to have pitched battles up in the depths of space in Pathfinder. Well, you're less likely to, but that's a whole nother thing. Then we also need to figure out what units are available. I mean, you have your standard run-of-the-mill things, peasant levies, men-at-arms, professional soldiers, again, depending on setting, may be either more common or less common, but then you're going to have your elite shock troopers, your ranged units, your artillery units, cavalry, light cavalry, and heavy, archer cavalry. So many different things that you can throw out there. And then that's not even factoring in units that are using magic, like individual sorcerers or wizards, clerics, druids, monstrous infantry, monstrous units like giant eagles, griffins, wyverns, manticores. So many wonderful, awesome things that you can throw at the players. And then the goals and objectives for each army. Objectives during a battle, obviously if it's in a siege type of situation, the attackers are going to want to breach the defenses and make their way inside. Or, if they don't want to breach the defenses, lay siege to the enemy and just wait them out. And the drawback to that is, of course, if they're having to wait them out, and the place is any sort of even decently supplied, they may end up being there for a while, and an army that's encamped and sitting in one place for a while trying to siege a castle and wait them out is making itself vulnerable to attack from relief forces, and then they're stuck between the hammer and the anvil, and once the two forces collide there and smash them against the castle walls, they're absolutely screwed. So a commander may be wanting to speed up the siege by assaulting the walls, but assaulting such a well-defended position is going to lead to a greater deal of casualties than they might otherwise suffer, and they may well break themselves on the castle walls to the point that, well, when the relief armies show up, they may end up having to retreat or be crushed anyways. So there will be all sorts of tricks, traps, and all sorts of dirty fighting tactics that are used in order to try to break the siege as quick as possible. Whereas the defenders want to hold out as long as possible, or even try to do what they can to sabotage the people sieging them so that they can try to break the siege that way and try to break it faster. And then we just need to figure out after that how the players fit into the grand scheme of things. And luckily for this, I've got an example for exactly how you can do that. This obviously, as I've been kind of hinting at throughout so far, it is set up with a siege in mind. At least, or at the very least, the players are on the side of the defenders rather than the offense. If they're on the offense, then possibly you can invert some of this a little bit quite easily and set up how the players would try to undermine the defenders. But going with the fact that the players are on the defensive side, we need to chart out the flow of battle and how it's going to play out roughly. This is just a rough guide, and this is a relatively short one just due to the amount of space I'm working with here. You can easily make the flow chart for a battle plan or the course of battle more complex with more twists and turns and more opportunities for the players to try to affect things and make them feel like they're a much more deeply ingrained and pivotal part of the overall battle itself. But we begin with our starting positions. The attackers are going to advance while the defenders are going to be holding in at their fortifications. Now, prior to the start of this here, while the attackers are getting ready to make their assault and the defenders are trying to fortify and dig themselves in further, the defensive commander can send the players out to try to sabotage the artillery. And from here we have two options. If they fail, then once the battle actually starts, the artillery is going to weaken the defender's position, destroying the barricades, palisades, and just in general driving archers or whatever ranged units out of their positions behind these fortifications. And during the battle, the players will be forced to make reflex saves every 3 rounds or potentially take damage from the incoming artillery, whether it's some kind of shrapnel, splash damage, or if God forbid they actually take a direct hit, they're going to be having to make these reflex saves, and it's going to be a battlefield hazard, and that's what it should be treated as, is just a recurring hazard that is going to constantly come up. But if they succeed, then they break down the enemy artillery and cause a great deal of confusion, and this keeps the defender's position strong. They'll have more friendly units available. There will actually be ranged units assisting them in battle and tying down and limiting the numbers of enemies that they actually have to fight. In either case, from here, after 6 rounds, the attackers are going to breach a section of the defenses, and the shock troopers are going to be pouring in, and it'll be the players' jobs to drive them back, or at least try to hold them in place and keep them from spreading throughout the defensive position too much. How this breach occurs, it's entirely dependent and predicated on the defensive position. If it's just a natural choke point in the terrain, like say a shallow point in a fairly wide river that the enemy can come across, well, and they've come across and they've managed to breach some dugouts and palisades, then the dugout and palisade point that's been breached is where the players are going to need to set up at and try to stem the tide. If it's a castle, well, either sappers have collapsed a section of wall, or siege towers manage to dock with the wall and lower its ramp, or enough ladders have set up against the wall and troops are climbing over. Now, the first wave of troops going through are more than likely going to be some of the more better armored and armed and trained troops to try to hold that breach, try to hold that point, and try to keep it open so that more troops can pour in behind them and they can start to spread and just start sacking the defensive position. So these are going to be a better quality troops than maybe what the players have been facing up to this point, and will present a serious challenge. Probably not something that's going to kill them right off, but definitely will be a serious drain on their resources. And the fact that more troops are going to be added in is really going to push and drive the players to throw a lot of what they have available at them at their disposal to try to keep things in place. Now, if they've disabled the artillery, there are going to be more friendly units in position to help them and provide that assistance in driving back the enemy. How bad the casualties are, I'd say leave it up to some die rolls, along with how well the players are doing, to kind of give that element of chance, or at least to make it, give them a sense of provide a little bit of theater, to give them a sense of, oh, everything hangs on a literal roll of the dice. Even if it actually doesn't, even if the whole thing is just scripted for you, still making a few extra die rolls here will add to that level of tension and really make things more nail-biting and engaging for the players. If they haven't disabled the artillery, then the artillery is actually going to be moving and fire away from that breach point and try to aim more for surrounding areas. The occasional errant missile may still drop in there. It's just how warfare ends up playing out, but they're going to be trying to drive and damage more enemy units that are trying to flow in to stem the tide in this breach here. But if the players are successful, then their furious defense is going to be buying them time to rally, and is going to allow more allied units to show up and help push them back, or at least hold them in this position. If they fail, though, then the enemy is going to be pushing through despite the valiant defense put up by the players, and they're going to begin pushing in through here. And that's where we arrive at the boss battle. How this boss battle takes shape, I'd say, will depend a little bit on how the overall battle has progressed so far. If the players are fairly successful here, then what they're going to be facing down is going to be a commander or a champion within this more elite shock troop unit. Somebody that's really going to put up a hell of a fight for them. Somebody who has carved a bloody path through the other defenders, and this is a pivotal moment where, this is a clashing of two heroic units where the success or failure is going to depend on who prevails in this personal fight here. Now, how personal it gets, that's going to be up to you to plan out. But if it's going to be more a clash of two heroic units, as in the shock troops and the players are going to be facing off, then throw in some extra help for the players to help kind of make it keep them from being swamped by just too many troops coming in all at once, because no matter how badass, at a certain point, having 20 attacks coming at you is some are going to hit, and the odds of having a critical hit land that takes down somebody is going to mount up a little bit, and you want to make the fight be just a little bit more fair as they go up against this higher level character with a couple of NPCs helping them out. You don't want the entire shock troop unit to just descend on these players. Alternately, if the players have failed quite a bit up to this point, then they're going to be they could potentially be sent out by the defense commander to go out and try to cause some sort of further harm, so that way, even though today ends in a loss, it's not going to be a total loss. They may be sent out to just outright assassinate the enemy commander, which at this point, if the players can manage to sneak their way through the enemy lines, the enemy commander is going to be relatively not as well defended because the bulk of his troops are laying waste to this defensive position. Is going to be maybe his personal bodyguard that are around him. And if the players can act fast enough, they can isolate this enemy commander and have a decent shot, the best shot at killing him. And if they manage to kill him, then it's going to throw the enemy army into confusion. They may well still butcher a great deal of the army or the forces in this defensive position, but the survivors will have more time to escape as the enemy army has to try to rally around, reorganize, and re-coordinate themselves in the face of the loss of this of their general or colonel or commander, whatever the title is. The decapitation of the command structure will provide at least enough of a confusion and disrupt things that the survivors can try to escape and rally around, or even link up with other allied forces that may have been trying to come in to relieve them. Either way, there's so much opportunity here for you to provide some engaging and fun play for your players. And this is just one small way that you can try to do that. Now, this is fairly bare bones, and like I said before, this is a really simple flowchart, but it gives you so much of an opportunity, again, to be flexible while still having some details arrayed. Obviously, figuring out what units are present, what's available there. Again, that's something you can be very general with. They have blocks of spearmen, archers, and cavalry with scattering of artillery units. Boom, you have an army right there. Or you can get more detailed and say they have the 82nd State Guard, the 101st Rifle Division, the 32nd Musketeers Division, with the Iron Fist Imperial Cavalry providing that heavy cavalry shock support, with the 3rd Gunners Unit, which is the artillery unit consisting of mortars and some cannons, which, hell, that's a fair bit of detail right there. You can even create some unit histories if you wanted to, but that's all up to you and how in-depth you want to get with all of this. And in general, the more details you have, the more the world feels alive, but that's up to you. But for now, we're going to leave it at that, and we will continue on with this series later on. Thank you all for your time. You folks have yourselves a good night. Oh, and if you've been enjoying the content here so far, maybe consider subscribing down to the channel. We can always use more members down here at the Gamers Den. Once again, I've been your host. You all have yourselves a good night.